Okay, now let's jump into section 113. You'll notice the date here, March of 1838. We don't have a lot of historical setting for why was Joseph asking these questions, or was it somebody else asking Joseph to find out the answer to these questions from Isaiah chapter 11. You'll notice that Isaiah chapter 11, back to our tree analogy, is this section where God has cut down the house of Israel, the tree. So you have this tree that's been cut down, and Israel feels like it's been totally forsaken, cut off. And in section 11, or in Isaiah chapter 11, it talks about a stem growing out of the root of Jesse. So this new growth coming where everything seemed to be desolate. And if you think about how the children of Israel were carried captive in the northern kingdom in 721 BC by the Assyrians, and then the southern kingdom of Judah carried away captive by Babylon in 587, 586 BC, it can feel like this scenario. And he's saying, wait, there's hope. There's new growth that's going to bring forth more fruit than you ever thought, imagined. And so the question here in section 113 is, what do these things mean? Who is the stem of Jesse spoken of in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th verses of the 11th chapter of Isaiah? And the answer is, verily thus saith the Lord, it is Christ. Stem of Jesse. Who's Jesse? Jesse is the father of King David. He is the most celebrated of all the kings of Israel. David, in fact, is the single most frequently mentioned name in our Bible. The name David appears more than any other proper name. They love David, the Jewish people do.
And Moses is like right up there with them. So like these two characters.
They look to David as the royal ruling monarch. The Davidic throne is a big deal, and they look to Moses as the lawgiver, and Father Abraham as kind of the patriarch. So those are the characters. So Jesse, the stem of Jesse, it's going to be somebody who is of the descendancy or of the lineage of Jesse through David, through King David. Well, that's Jesus. The Christ as the stem. And then verse 3, what is the rod spoken of in the first verse of the 11th chapter? The answer, verse 4, behold, thus saith the Lord, it is a servant in the hands of Christ, who is partly a descendant of Jesse as well as of Ephraim, or of the house of Joseph, on whom there is laid much power. So there's a rod that comes off of the stem coming out. Who is that? Well, it's going to be kind of a mixed lineage individual who's going to do amazing things. Then he goes on to verse 5, what is the root of Jesse spoken of? Verse 6, behold, thus saith the Lord, it is a descendant of Jesse, as well as of Joseph, unto whom rightly belongs the priesthood, and the keys of the kingdom for an ensign and for the gathering of my people in the last days. I love how Joseph is going to the Lord with questions from the scriptures, and the Lord is helping Joseph liken the scriptures to himself. That's the beauty of scriptures. That's what makes them living water, is their applicability over time and over space. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter what your condition is, what your gender is, what your age is, what your socioeconomic status is. You can find likening principles from every page of Scripture to make them become your story. And it's alive, and you can apply it. You can find yourself in there. And I love how in this section 113, God is helping Joseph actually see himself in this, with this whole root of Jesse analogy seems to be coming out as God's going to do his work. Now, this is just the beginning phase, because what we end up with is a tree that is so big and is so fruitful, but we're just looking at those beginning phases here in Isaiah chapter 11. Now, if you combine this with what Jesus teaches his 11 apostles, after they arise from the Last Supper. In John chapter 14, he says, "Arise, let us go hence." And then in 15, they're probably walking through some vineyards, and Jesus teaches them, "I am the true vine, and you're the branches. And if you don't abide in me, then you have no life. You'll be purged, pruned, cut, and set aside and burned because there's no fruit there." I love this analogy because the minute I start to become prideful, I lose humility and I start to think, I'm all right. I'm pretty good. I got this. I got this figured out. It's as if I'm saying to God, I don't need you today. I got this. I know what I'm doing with this. And I then cut myself off from this vine, Jesus Christ, this stem. And I'm saying, I got it. Well, I no longer have access to all of that power and that energy and that capacity that flows into me from Jesus. Without him, I'm nothing more than a fruitless branch lying on the side of the vineyard waiting to be burned. But with him, I can grow. With him, if I abide in him, then I can endure even long periods of drought or major storm or terrible diseases that come along. As long as I abide in him, he will make me fruitful according to the way he needs me to be fruitful. Now, unfortunately for us, sometimes, using this analogy, with like a grapevine as an example, everybody who's ever planted grapes or fruit trees knows that to make them more fruitful, you have to prune them, you have to cut them, you have to shape them. And I don't know any human being who loves the pruning process, the shaping process. It's not, if you're finding yourself going through a major trial in your life, whether you've lost a loved one or a relationship, whether you've lost a job, whether you've lost your health, whether you've lost money, whether you've lost a home, doesn't matter. Whether something has gotten lost or not, the point is that is an opportunity to let God prevail yet again in my life and in your life. And it's to look heavenward and say, I was putting so much effort into that and now it's gone. What would thou have me do with what I have left? And he will help you become more fruitful and produce more fruit on what he has shaped you to become. It's a beautiful principle that's not always painless, but it's beautiful if we let God prevail and we let him be the root of our life and we tap into that power.